I still remember the weight of that morning. The way sunlight crawled through the blinds of my office like it was searching for something it had lost. Maybe it was me. I had built this company from scratch. Every brick, every late night, every coffee that turned cold before I could taste it. And yet that morning, I wasn't the one being congratulated in the boardroom. I was the one being replaced. My brother Easton walked in wearing the same suit I had gifted him on his graduation day. His smile was calm, confident, almost rehearsed. The board members clapped, one by one, as our father announced him as the new CEO of Shaw Riverfront Holdings. My name wasn't even mentioned. I sat there in silence, listening to the applause that used to be mine. It felt like the air had been drained from the room. When my father finally looked at me, his expression wasn't pride, it was relief. Like a long-standing mistake had just been corrected. I stood up, forcing a smile, my hands trembling beneath the table. "Congratulations," I said, my voice steady, my heart anything but. Easton gave me a look that still burns in my memory. A look that said you never belonged here anyway. I walked out before the champagne was poured. I didn't cry that day. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I refused to give them the satisfaction. The city outside was loud, full of ambition and noise. But for the first time in years, I felt completely invisible. That night, I went home to silence. No messages, no calls. Just the echo of a single decision that ended everything I had built. Yet somewhere in that silence, something else began. A thought. A quiet spark that whispered, "You made this empire once, you can make another. But this time, it will be yours alone." The next morning, I walked past the glass doors of Shaw Riverfront, pretending everything was normal. My badge still gave me access, but the security guard barely looked at me. Easton's nameplate glinted in the morning sun where mine used to be. Every step I took felt heavier, as if the floor itself was judging me for daring to walk these halls. I stopped at the boardroom, just to glance inside. He was there, smiling and shaking hands like he had earned it all, oblivious to the blood, sweat, and nights I had poured into this empire. The betrayal was sharper than I expected. Not just from him, but from my own family. They had all watched him take the throne while pretending it was fair, natural even. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed every meeting, every presentation, every client I had landed that made this company what it was. And I realized something terrifying. I had no safety net here. Every loyal colleague either avoided me or whispered behind closed doors. My empire had crumbled in one morning, and the people I trusted most were either blind or complicit. Yet anger has a way of sharpening focus. The humiliation fueled a clarity I hadn't felt in years. If they thought this was the end of me, they were wrong. I had one advantage they didn't see. Years ago, I had quietly set up a small advisory firm, KS Warehouse Advisors. It had been a tax shield, a paper company for legal purposes. Nobody remembered it. Nobody knew it could become real. And suddenly, in the quiet of my apartment, surrounded by the hum of city lights, I realized I had a weapon hidden in plain sight. Easton had celebrated his victory, unaware that the chessboard had already been set. Every empire has cracks. And I was going to find his. That night, I made a decision. I would not just survive this betrayal. I would dismantle it, piece by piece. And when the dust settled, I would be the one standing tall, untouched by their shallow applause. I dusted off the paperwork for KS warehouse advisors like it was a relic. It sat in a forgotten folder in a safety deposit box, pages brittle from years of neglect, signatures faded, but valid. I had created it as a shield, a small legal shell to insulate parts of my work from tax swings and messy family decisions. I never imagined I would actually use it as a weapon, but that morning the idea felt like medicine, bitter but curative. The first move was simple on paper and brutal in effect. I transferred a handful of dormant contracts into KS, Apex National being the largest among them. Apex had always liked me. They trusted the work I did for them, not the family name on the letterhead. I picked up the phone and called Marissa at Apex, keeping my voice steady, reminding her of the nights I had spent on their logistics strategies, of the spreadsheet tweaks no one else had thought of. She remembered, of course. She sounded surprised when I told her about KS, but not hostile. She said she would meet me. That meeting changed everything. I walked into their office with nothing but a pitch deck and a conviction that had been carved by betrayal. I did not sell anger. I sold competence. I sold the exact reasons they had trusted me before: attention to detail, honesty about risk, and the stubborn, almost obsessive will to make things work. By the end of the week, Apex signed a pilot contract with KS. It was small at first, but it carried the weight of a signal: clients can and will follow people, not just logos. Word traveled quickly in our niche. One or two small clients trickled over. Then a mid-sized chain with regional warehouses made an exploratory call. I had to be careful. I had to appear humble, practical, and utterly indispensable. Behind the scenes, I also began to reassemble a team. I reached out to a few people who had been loyal to me but too scared to act when the boardroom changed hands. Some declined. They feared their careers, their mortgages, the wrath of my father. They had chosen safety. I respected them for it and kept them at arm's length. I needed people who could move quickly and keep secrets. Those who agreed were not only brilliant, they were hungry for justice in a way that matched mine. Each hire was a quiet reunion, a pact whispered over late-night calls and encrypted emails. We drew tactical lines. Who would handle operations? Who would lead client transition? Who would manage the legal scaffolding that made corporate takeovers messy? I spent hours with lawyers calibrating non-compete clauses and identifying clients who had layered contracts with loopholes. Shaw Riverfront had been careless in the way empires often are, focused on scale and headlines rather than small contract language that could shelter a competitor. Those tiny oversights were now our keys. I also started a quiet PR strategy, nothing flashy, just controlled narratives sent to industry newsletters and trade contacts. That was important, because perception matters more than most people realize. When the market senses instability in a supplier, it looks for alternatives. I fed that hunger without shouting. I let curiosity do the heavy lifting. Meanwhile, Easton was celebrating. Photos of him at ribbon cuttings, quotes about fresh leadership, and family unity circulated through LinkedIn like polished marble. I watched them with a strange mix of nausea and calm. Their confidence had a crack inside it, and I intended to widen that crack slowly, enough that they would not see the pattern until it was too late. The first real strike came when one of my former account managers slipped me a folder of client notes and internal complaints. She had been let go in the layoffs, Easton announced, to show efficiency. Her voice shook when she handed me the file. She said she could not stand watching the company I had built get hollowed out. She wanted to help. We turned those notes into actionable intelligence. We tailored proposals targeting the exact pain points those clients had been ignoring: poor inventory reconciliation, expensive last-mile inefficiencies, and a lack of transparent reporting. Each proposal was precise and personal. Each one read like a promise to fix a problem clients had learned to live with. We offered better terms in the pilot phases and guaranteed two things Easton's team had stopped promising: direct senior oversight and measurable KPIs. The numbers mattered, but stories mattered just as much. I started telling the stories of lost shipments found again, of teams who finally had forecasts they could trust, of managers who sleep better because their warehouses stopped leaking money. Those stories reached the right inboxes. Within 2 months, KS had secured enough contracts to look like a legitimate challenger. It was not just about revenue, it was about reputation. Shifts began to appear in Shaw Riverfront's quarterly reports. Revenue slid in specific regions where our new clients moved their business. Easton tried to spin it as market fluctuation, but his answers were thin and rehearsed. He held emergency meetings, cut costs again, laid off more staff, and blamed external pressures while failing to address the real issue: clients were leaving. My father called once, softly, asking if I would come for dinner. I heard pain in his voice and something else, guilt perhaps, but not apology. I declined. I wanted his pity to have consequences, and I wanted to see the next move unfold without my interference. As KS grew, so did the stakes. Inside the company I was rebuilding there were whispers. Some admired the audacity, some feared the fallout. I kept reminding my team, we were not doing this for revenge alone. We were restoring fairness and competence to an industry that had forgotten those values. But revenge and restoration often sit on the same thin line. At night I wrote contingency plans, legal arguments, and exit strategies. I mapped out scenarios where Easton would counterattack using family influence, where he could freeze certain accounts, or try to pull supplies away. Each scenario had an answer. Each answer was drawn from the experience of a woman who had once been invisible and refused to be again. The last week of the quarter brought our first major triumph. Apex expanded the pilot into a full contract and recommended KS to 2 other clients who had been on Shaw Riverfront's roster for years. Those recommendations snowballed into a cascade of emails and phone calls that Easton's leadership could no longer dismiss as coincidence. He called me a week later. His voice, for the first time since that fateful boardroom, held something like fear. He wanted to negotiate. He asked for a meeting. I agreed. I told myself it was to learn his next move, to measure his desperation. I also knew it would be the first time I would look him in the eye and show him what his choice had created. The chessboard was set, and the players had finally noticed that the game had changed. The day of the meeting, I arrived at Peabody, a quiet little cafe tucked between glass towers, the kind of place that demanded focus and whispers rather than celebration. Easton was already there, scanning the room, his usual confidence a little off balance. He smiled when he saw me, the same rehearsed smile that had haunted my memories for months. I returned it, calm and measured, because anger, as I had learned, only gives them power. We sat across from each other, the table a thin barrier between 2 people who had once been siblings and now were opponents. I ordered coffee, black, just like I used to when preparing for boardroom battles. Easton spoke first, trying to gauge my mood. "Kendall," he said, voice casual, "I didn't expect to see you here like this." I leaned forward, hands folded, and let the silence stretch. Then I said, "You should have." He blinked, not expecting the sharpness in my tone. I didn't mention KS directly. I didn't have to. The ripple of contracts, the slow bleed of clients, and the quiet industry whispers had already reached him. He felt it. I could see it in the tightening around his eyes, the way his fingers drummed the table nervously. I let him squirm a little longer, asking banal questions about how things had been, how he felt running the company. I laced every word with the unspoken truth. I had been replaced, overlooked, dismissed, yet I was now the force he had underestimated. Finally, I leaned back and smiled, a small, controlled smile. "Do you know why I'm here?" I asked. He hesitated. "To talk," he guessed, cautiously. I shook my head. "To show you something you refused to see. That talent, integrity, and dedication, things you couldn't buy with a title, still matter. And that choices have consequences." His jaw tightened. He realized then that this wasn't a negotiation. This was the moment where the reality of his reign collided with the structure I had been quietly rebuilding. I slid a small folder across the table, filled with summaries of contracts KS had won, client testimonials, and financial projections. He glanced at it, his eyes widening in disbelief. He wanted to interrupt, to defend, to argue, but the evidence was clear. The empire he thought he controlled was crumbling quietly under my hands. I leaned in, voice calm, but edged with steel. "You thought this was a victory," I said, "but victories built on betrayal are temporary. You should have remembered that the people who build companies also hold their secrets, and I held mine well." For the first time, I saw fear in Easton's eyes, not the childish fear of a scolding sibling, but the real fear of a man who realized he had underestimated someone he had once thought weaker. The conversation ended without handshakes or apologies. We parted, leaving each other with the invisible scars of history rewritten. I walked out into the city, sunlight no longer searching for me, it seemed to follow me, tracing the path of someone who had reclaimed her space. That night, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. This confrontation wasn't just about revenge. It was about proving, first to myself and then to everyone else, that underestimation is a mistake you never repeat. And as I looked at my reflection in the office window, I realized I was no longer invisible. I was unstoppable. The days after the Peabody meeting were a whirlwind. KS Apex Solutions wasn't just a hidden firm anymore. It had become a visible threat. Clients that had once been loyal to Shore Riverfront quietly signed letters of intent, shifting contracts and promising renewed commitment. I watched it happen with a mixture of satisfaction and precision. Every move was calculated. Every call, every email, every pitch, was a step closer to dismantling the empire that had tried to erase me. I spent mornings in the office with my core team, mapping out expansions, reviewing operations, and identifying the next wave of clients to approach. I had learned that revenge isn't about chaos, it's about order, strategy, and timing. Easton tried to counter. He tightened budgets, increased pressure on employees, and attempted to poach my team. But it was too late. The people who had chosen loyalty, competence, and integrity over fear were already with me. The insiders who remained loyal to Shore Riverfront were hesitant, unsure, and increasingly aware that their leadership was faltering. Every mistake Easton made, whether in mismanagement or poor communication, amplified the credibility of KS. I didn't celebrate the fall of my brother's reign. I celebrated the meticulous orchestration of a system that finally worked, that finally recognized competence and dedication. By the third month, KS had expanded to handle regional operations for multiple mid-sized clients, generating revenue that Easton hadn't anticipated. Each success was small but cumulative, eroding the stability he had taken for granted. I kept a detailed journal of our progress, but it wasn't for me, it was a record, a reminder of how strategy and patience can outperform arrogance and entitlement. One afternoon, Easton called me, sounding desperate for the first time since his promotion. He tried to negotiate, offered terms, pleaded for collaboration. I listened quietly, asking questions, probing for weakness, but I didn't reveal our full strength. Every word I spoke was measured, a delicate balance of civility and quiet warning. He ended the call frustrated, and I smiled. KS was no longer just a company. It was a symbol of what happens when underestimated people take control of their destiny. News in the industry began to spread. Trade journals hinted at the unexpected rise of KS, and whispers circulated that the once dominant shore riverfront was struggling in key regions. I didn't intervene in these stories. I let them happen naturally. Perception, I had learned, can be as powerful as reality. In boardrooms, my team moved decisively. We optimized logistics, streamlined reporting, and implemented client-focused solutions that Easton's regime had ignored. Every successful project reinforced our reputation, turning cautious clients into advocates. And in the quiet moments, I reminded myself why I was doing this. Not out of hatred, but out of justice. Not for petty revenge, but to reclaim what had been taken unfairly. The balance of power had shifted, quietly but irreversibly. Easton was still CEO on paper, but the ground beneath him was eroding. By the 6th month, KS Apex Solutions was generating enough revenue to rival Shore Riverfront in multiple regions. I had built something my brother could not destroy, because it wasn't just a company. It was a carefully constructed ecosystem of trust, talent, and foresight. That evening, I sat alone in the office, looking at projections and contracts, a small smile on my lips. I knew the next moves would be critical. One wrong step, one lapse in strategy, and the fragile equilibrium could collapse. But I also knew this. I had learned from betrayal. I had mastered patience. And I had transformed anger into a tool that would secure not just my position, but my legacy. The Empire Strikes Back is not a moment, it's a method. And I had perfected it. All came down to one evening. The city skyline was wrapped in a golden haze when I received the news. Shore Riverfront had lost its largest government contract. It wasn't just another deal. It was the backbone of their annual revenue. And the irony was poetic. The same department that once dismissed me had now chosen KS Apex Solutions for a full-scale partnership. Easton must have seen it before I did, because his name appeared on my phone a few minutes later. I answered, not out of courtesy, but curiosity. His voice was flat, defeated, a tone I had never heard from him. "You did this," he said. I didn't deny it. "I rebuilt what you broke," I replied. The rest was just consequence. Silence followed. The kind of silence that speaks louder than rage. Then he said quietly, "You've won." I let out a slow breath, my eyes tracing the city lights outside my window. "No, Easton," I said softly. "I didn't win. I just stopped losing." The call ended. I didn't feel the rush of triumph I thought I would. Instead, I felt something deeper, closure. I had fought this war not to destroy my family, but to reclaim my voice. A week later, headlines confirmed what we already knew. Shore Riverfront Holdings announced a major restructuring, citing unexpected market challenges. The polite phrasing couldn't hide the truth. Their empire had fallen. And yet, I sent no messages, gave no interviews, and took no victory laps. I simply continued working, quietly, intentionally. Because true power doesn't need an audience, it needs endurance. Months later, I met my mother for coffee. She looked older, weary from the fractures that success had carved into our family. Was it worth it? She asked. I thought about that for a moment. It had to be, I said. Not because of what I lost, but because of who I became after losing it. She nodded, and in her eyes, for the first time, I saw understanding. When I left the cafe that day, the city felt different. The noise no longer drowned me out. It moved with me, like rhythm instead of chaos. I walked past the office tower that once held my name, now just another piece of skyline history. I didn't look back. Some stories aren't about revenge. They're about reclamation. I didn't destroy him, I revealed him. I didn't burn the bridge. I built a better one on my own. And when the world finally learned my name again, it wasn't as someone's sister or daughter. It was as the woman who turned betrayal into legacy.